Bob knows, and a few others know, that like a few others here, I am a senior, right? I have my AARP card, and more importantly, I have my senior's card from Denny's. So this joke that I want to tell you to start out, to kind of give us a summary, know that I'm falling in the same category. How many seniors does it take to change a light bulb?
3.
Change? Who said anything about change? That's where most of us are most of our life, right? It doesn't take seniors, it takes all of us that way. But last week we learned how God took Abram and Sarai and really ran them through the changes, didn't he? Took them out of the land where they grew up, and he moved them to a place they'd never been to. Kind of an adventure. He gave them a number of different difficulties, even changed their name. All of this in order to begin to work out his plan of salvation, in order to continue that upper story, God's story. A plan to retrieve us out of the grasp of sin. And Abram and Sarai were two very critical figures in there. Well, this week we're going to learn about Joseph. Joseph is another one of those very critical figures. Joseph's life was a dream that digressed into a nightmare, all on the road to glory. Okay, let me say that again. For those of you that are taking some notes, this is a good point. Joseph's life was a dream that digressed into a nightmare, all on the road to glory. His life was intertwined, it seemed, with dreams and garments. They were either getting him into trouble or they were getting him praise, one or the other. But all the way along, it seemed to be Joseph's destiny, if you will, under God, to be intertwined with garments and dreams. We have the cloak of many colors. Now that's one of these children's Bible stories that we all know, right? How Joseph's father gave him this coat of many colors and how his brothers were jealous of this gift. And it's out of all of that jealousy and a bit of Joseph's tactless behavior that gets him into trouble with his brothers, and they eventually put him down into a dry cistern, deep well. And there they leave him for a while. They're debating whether they want to kill him or whether they want to leave him. Finally, they decide to sell him as a slave into a caravan going into Egypt. And that's what they do. All because Joseph didn't really understand at times how his words affected his family. He was already the favored one in his family. I know his family was different than all ours. There was a favored one in the family, and he was it. But Joseph, either out of innocence or sometimes maybe even design, tended to bring that up to his brothers. Wearing this precious coat, this beautiful coat, out to go meet your brothers who are working and you're back with your father just listening to stories. Yeah, that goes over real well all the time, right? We all have good times with that one. But it also was tied up in dreams. In particular, we have the dreams that are there with Pharaoh and how that moves our story along. We know the story as it was shown this morning, how Joseph is sold as a slave into Egypt. So he comes into Egypt as a slave, and after a number of years, he finally becomes the second in command in all of Egypt. Not bad. Bright young man, child prodigy perhaps. But here was Joseph moving into not only this lower story of his life, all these seemingly uneventful or unrelated events, and this upper story, this one of God's redemption for all of us. And we're going to look at how those two intersect. Let me give you some timeline here. It was 17 years old when Joseph told his brothers about his dream that they would bow down and serve him. Okay, so you can excuse that one. 17, not always the most insightful. Okay, not always the most tactful. But here's Joseph saying, you know what, I had a dream last night, and in it were all of you. And in that dream, all of you were going to bow down to me. Yeah, was he looking for praise in that? I don't think so. He was 30 years old when he was made second in command over all of Egypt. He was 39 when his brothers came into Egypt during the famine looking for grain. 22 years elapsed after that. And then he died at the age of 110. That'd be okay, right? Good life. So even though he was sold as a slave, even though he went through some very difficult times, he spent the vast majority of his life in privilege and in power and in grace. I think we sometimes miss that point. We look at Joseph's life and say, wow, look at the troubles. Look at all the things he suffered. Boy, if it had been me and my brothers sold me into slavery, you got to know that when they came crawling looking for grain, boy, I'd have let them have it. And probably most of us. But not Joseph. Joseph kept his eye on that upper story, that story of God. He knew that God was about doing something great. Now, he didn't always know what that great thing was, but he always knew that it was there. And he always kept his eye on God. Not unlike another character we'll learn about later on, Daniel. How do you get thrown down into a pit of lions and stay alive? Well, you keep your eyes on God instead of the lions. You keep your focus on what God is doing rather than what the lions can do. Probably good philosophy for all of us. Joseph did the same thing. Joseph lived by what the Apostle Paul later said in the New Testament in Romans 8. For we know that all things work together for good for those who love God. In other words, if you keep your focus on God, if you love God, even the trials, even the difficulties, even the setbacks are going to work into God's plan. And we're going to be able to see good things that God is doing through all of that. Joseph was able to forgive his brothers of their misdeeds, their jealousy, their selling him into slavery. Why? Well, because he kept his eye on God. He knew that God was about doing something good. Now, he didn't know all the steps that we're going to take to there, and he just figured that his brothers selling him into slavery had something to do with that. Now, who of us can do that? Not too many. I think that's one of the things for me that really stands out for Joseph is this ability to see that God is about doing something, even if he doesn't know what it is. And so he keeps his eye on God instead of all the things that are happening down here, all the little seemingly unrelated events. Hey, boy, having your father's heart broken, having the jealousy of your brothers being sold into slavery, then when you're in slavery, start to rise up the ladder only to be put down again, thrown into jail. And then you do a good turn for a couple other prisoners. One of those gets really bad news and dies. The other one gets really good news and gets released and says, yep, I'll bring your story to the officials. I'll let them know all about you. I'll get you out of jail. And then he forgot. And so Joseph sat in jail. And he sat. And he sat. Now, Joseph could have despaired in all of that. Joseph could have given up in all of that. Joseph could have gotten very angry and said, that ungrateful person. How could that cupbearer do that to me? After all I